Great. We're going to give it about 1 more minute and then we'll start. But in the meantime, I don't know that we'll have enough time to get everybody's voice in the room, say hello, who you are, where you're from. But I will ask everybody while we're sitting here waiting for another minute or so to start off this session with thinking about something that never fails to make you laugh. And as facilitator's privilege, I will tell you something that never fails to make me laugh, which is my mother. Actually, both of my parents. They are South African. I'm South African as well. And my mother will come out with some of the strangest and most wonderful sayings. So I hope that as we start today's session, you too can start to think a little bit about what brings you joy. And don't worry, hopefully this will not be a very woo-woo session. Hopefully some parts of woo-woo though, because we're going to do a little bit of everything. All right, Eric, I think I will give it a start. And will you, and you continue to give everybody a thing.
I'll keep letting them in, and I will go on mute now and hand it over to you, Donita. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, I'm still sorry, Eric. I meant to ask you, would you like to say anything about KMI before we start?
Sure, thank you. It's a pleasure to have you host again, and to everyone out there, I'm not sure how familiar they are with you, but Donita goes back with us a couple of years. She was in our first one of our first CKM classes with John Hobel, and John being one of our instructors, and Donita and John co-hosted recently a couple of sessions about conversational leadership in KM, and you can check those out at the webinar section at kminstitute.org. So I will give a link out to everyone who's attending today, the recording for this. I'm sure some folks would like to see that. And just a quick reminder about where to go for all of our webinars, where Donita is hosting a few of those, and you'll have a lot more new content to check out. So Donita, give it over to you, and thank you for hosting today.
Yeah, thank you so much to KMI for allowing me to host. And as I mentioned to a few of you before, I'm trying to dodge the sun. So if I appear, in a halo, it's not because I'm special. It's just because I'm in the sun. So I will not apologize, but I will give one caveat at the beginning, which is that this presentation is pretty slide heavy initially. It's about 30 minutes, which I know strikes terror into the hearts of most. I'm going to try and keep it moving as quickly as possible. What I would love to say is that as a true knowledge manager, what I'm hoping is that everybody is going to be able to leave this session with a number of questions, with a number of thoughts and ideas. And I would just encourage you either to reach out to me, to reach out to KMI, reach out to each other. If there are some questions that you would love to discuss further, if you're interested in speaking about this. Most of these slides can have an entire hour to a day discussion on them. So I will just say it's a fire hose of information, but I want to give as much, I want to give everybody as many tools as they can, knowing that this is a very, very pertinent and germane issue in today's climate. So I will start the presentation. And again, welcome to everybody. Thank you for being here. Feel free to keep your video off if you're interested in bandwidth issues or whatever. And then, but I will ask when we come back together as a group that we show our faces as much as we are able. All right, let's go. So the context for today is that I believe that knowledge to the answers to most everything people are looking for, especially as they're looking in their organizations, lives in the organization. It's just about finding the right way to get that knowledge out. Knowledge is power, and knowledge shared is power multiplied. One of my powers is not being able to put graphics where they're supposed to be, which you'll see with the next little one as well. This might be a little strange for a KMI session, but this issue of racial equity and racial equity compiled with knowledge management can be a little spicy. So if you're feeling some sort of way, feel free to turn off your video if you haven't already. Um, take notes, mute me, but just try to stay in the presentation. I don't think it's all that spicy, but if it does sort of trigger some thoughts or some things for yourself, do what you need to take care of yourself. And lastly, the content for me is so very personal because I am such a knowledge management nerd, but I've also been doing racial equity work for my entire adult life. It's not always been sanctioned racial equity work, but it has been something that has been close to my heart, and because of who I am. I was born in South Africa in the apartheid era, and my parents emigrated when I was 5 to Pittsburgh in the middle of the winter, which is somewhat irrelevant. But so issues of race and issues of how we talk about it and how we think about it have always been present. So for our agenda today, my intro and Eric's intro there, I know a lot of you already know what knowledge management is, but I want to make sure that we, as a group, know where we're coming from together, because I have a just slightly different view of knowledge management than some other people. So I want to make sure that we're on the same page as we go forward. Why everybody knows about why knowledge management, what knowledge management is, the need for racial equity through knowledge management, and then we're going to have a Q&A. If we have enough time, I'm going to try and do some breakout groups as well, because I'd love for you to be able to talk to each other. We'll see. We'll see if I get loquacious or not. So one of the things that I found is that a lot of organizations are sitting on a lot of knowledge, but it's squirreled away somewhere, either in an archive or in somebody's head. A lot of organizations tend to let people's knowledge walk out the door when they go to a new organization or when they are retiring or something. So we all have a lot of knowledge, but unless we put it to use, it doesn't mean a lot. I'm going to do very quickly these guys. This is just for context. You know, employee engagement is one of the most crucial aspects of organizational health. And without employees being engaged, we lose not only the interest and the productivity, but there's a lot of money at stake as well. So the more engaged your employees are, the better off you're going to be. And a huge part of how engaged your employees are is going to be about how the knowledge gets to them, how they can disperse and disseminate their knowledge, how knowledge flows within the organization. All right, I'm going to move over slightly. Sorry. I'm going to try and dodge the sun again a little bit. Okay. So again, this is just a quick and hopefully not dirty little bit of where I think knowledge management sits in the world and with how I understand knowledge management. I am not monitoring the chat, by the way, because I can't do 2 things at the same time. So if there's a very urgent question or idea, Eric, would you mind letting me know? I'd appreciate it. So for me, the components of knowledge management are technology, so like your databases, the document management systems, that sort of thing. Processes, project management, time tracking, anything that connects technology to people. And then the most important and, for me, centered piece is people. One of the reasons is because technology and process are agnostic. They don't do anything without somebody programming them or using them. So the little component that either creates the magic or makes it all fall apart is people. So I like to have technology and process as part of this KM triumvirate, but as you'll see in my beautiful graphic, the knowledge management stool, we love to have people centered between process and technology. One of the things that is really compromising our organizations is this siloing of departments, siloing of knowledge, process, technology, and people. And so I decided that to turn this stool so that it's facing, so that the top is facing us. But again, you still have these quadrants of, or this triangles of people, process, and technology. Knowledge management is about creating pathways between those three components, making sure that your people understand your process and technology, and that your process and technology make sense to the people using them. What that does is that it creates trust within the organization. If you trust your people, if you know that your people are great, but your process is sort of suspect, or your technology is antiquated or doesn't talk to each other, you're going to lose trust. If you've got great people and decent technology, but your processes are bad, again, you're going to have some issues with how your organization functions. And this slide I stole directly from John Hovel. He knows about it. He's given me permission to do so. It's not about necessarily what the knowledge is. I mean, you should probably have very good knowledge if you want your organization to succeed, but it's about how knowledge flows within the organization. We identify where knowledge flows well, where there are gaps, where people hoard knowledge, so that we can take a look and see what is working well within the organization and what's not working well within the organization. And so I often, lots of times, refer to myself as the plumber of the organization. And various people within the organization are also going to be plumbers at various times. And it leads to my tagline, which I hope will not offend Eric. It's that I manage the crap out of knowledge. When I was doing my class at KMI, I was seated at a table with two other remarkable women, Kelly Clark and Rosanna Stevens. And one of the first things that John told us was that there is no knowledge management definition that's accepted by everybody. So to work on our own and to live by those principles. And this is the one that the three of us came up with. And I'll read it out, which is creating pathways that integrate communities in an equitable manner and facilitate knowledge in order for the right information to get to the right person at the right time in the right format. And all of the italicized words are, of course, very important, but I also want to call out the word communities, because I think a lot of our organizations refer to ourselves as families, which is great because you do want to have that familial feeling. We spend more time at work sometimes than with our own families, but that makes it seem like we should know all of those unwritten rules. When I was a kid, my sister and I knew that we were not supposed to wake our parents up before 7:30 on a Saturday morning, because that was just not done. But somebody coming into our family would not know that rule, and to expect them to know that rule sets them up for failure. So if you're coming into an organization and thinking of it as a community, it has a slightly a different connotation that I really appreciate, because we choose our communities and our communities choose us. So if you're doing your job as a knowledge manager or as a knowledge worker, if you're not the knowledge manager in your organization, you're going to make sure that anybody coming into your community has access to the information and to the knowledge that they need in order to thrive and in order for them to be engaged as an employee, as a part of this community. So then we do this very abrupt sort of shift into racial equity. I hope it will come together. I'm not going to ask you to trust me on that. But so talking about communities, talking about racial equity within our organizations, and a couple of other caveats. Number one, I am US based, so this is very US centric, but I know that it applies to many other countries as well. Not necessarily who's in the majority, who's in the minority, who's marginalized, who's not, but I think the basic concept of equity within organizations is universal. Secondly, I come from the nonprofit world and the philanthropic world, so you'll see some slides again that are about philanthropy, but can also be used when talking about other organizations. So again, I'm not going to read everything to you. If you have questions about what diversity means to an organization, look it up. The Google is a fantastic process, a fantastic tool. And so, but these are some ideas about why it matters for us to talk about equity in the workplace. If you think it's just about altruism, if you think it's just about being a good human being, which it should be, by the way, when you have diverse teams, your bottom line gets better. If any other person came to your organization and said, hey, you know what, I can get you somewhere between 17 and 35% more of your bottom line, everybody would be like, come here, tell us everything you know. But the moment you talk about diversity within teams, and I'm talking about racial diversity, age, differently abled, sexual orientation, all of those things, because what happens when you have different minds, people are A, much more polite to each other, and B, they have to think better in order to make their cases, which I just think is delightful, right? When you are in an echo chamber, you don't have to think very much. You can just say, oh yeah, I believe that. But when somebody challenges you, then you have to come up with things that really make sense. And like, I want to succeed against the very best, right? I don't want to succeed just because I'm sitting in the same room with the same people who have the same ideas as me. All right, so who gets a slice of this pie? Whoops, a daisy. There we go. So US-based foundations, and again, this is from the foundation world, philanthropy, et cetera. 92% of US-based foundations are led by white people. This is from 2016, and I believe it's now 93%. So we've changed, but we've changed so that it's even more organizations are white-led. Executive staff is 83%, and program officers are 67%. I have looked at some data for corporations, et cetera, in the United States. It's not very different. And so what happens when you have this sort of homogenous leadership is that you have majority white staff, and then when you're recruiting for new positions, like any good organization, you love the people that you're working with already, so you go to them to say, hey, talk to your friends, get your friends in here. But as you'll see, you get a homogeneous applicant pool because you have recruitment via your staff that is primarily white. Then even if you do get people who come in who look different, who sound different, who have different thoughts, you're going to have implicit biases kick in because they are not like me, and so therefore I don't understand them. So I'm not sure if I'd be able to work with them. And then once you're in the interview, again, I've heard things like, you know, I'm not sure. I didn't like the way her hair presented, and because of somebody's hair, she didn't get a job. Here's some things that made me think a lot. 80% of nonprofit staff use their personal networks, right? And I'm sure the same is in corporate world and the rest of the business world. Academia, yeah. So 75% of white Americans have have social networks without any minority presence. Think about that for a second again. 75% of white Americans have social networks without any minority presence. So when you're looking for people to recommend for a job, you're going to go to your networks, and those networks are really monochromatic, I should say. And I think a lot of people already know about the fact that when there was a resume study that they took everything away but the names, like identifying universities, identifying all those things. They took those away, just had the experience of the people, but had two, like a quote-unquote white-sounding name and a quote-unquote black-sounding name. And the people with the white-sounding names got called back 1.5 times more than the people with the black-sounding names. I think a lot of people know that. What a lot of people don't know is that equates to about 7 years of experience. So simply because of somebody's name, they're denied 7 years of experience in the workforce, which makes them not as viable a candidate when the next time something comes around. And then we find ways to get with our own communities. And this is, again, where community comes in. Because you have to, like with your family, you can't choose who's there. But with a community, you can. And so if you're looking around at your community and it looks the same, it sounds the same, it acts the same, it might be time to start inviting different people into that community. So these are things that I have heard myself not just in my organization, but in many other organizations. I think one of the worst ones is, for me, are you sure? Because I have been asked a number of times, you know, I'm a professional, I've studied at KMI, I would think that I do my job very well, but I come up with things that don't play into what we've said for ourselves in our narrative, and I am asked, are you sure? Lots of people ask, are you sure? But minorities get asked that question a lot. And so think about times where maybe you've asked that, when maybe you've thought about it, or when it's been directed at you. Another anecdote that I have is that a friend of mine, Damon Kelly, was doing his PhD work on why there are so few black men in C-suite positions, again, in nonprofit. And he was, you know, he's talking, and I asked him, so what about this thing that people say, well, you know, we're looking for people with a certain degree. He said 100% of the black men that I interviewed in C-suite positions, 100% have master's degrees. Most of them have doctorates, law degrees, you know, further education than that. And so he said, guess how many white men that I interviewed had a master's degree? Again, C-suite. 40%. So you've got black men with master's degrees vying for the same jobs as white men with no master's degrees. So when you have those requirements come in when you're looking at a job description and it says master's degree preferred, well, yeah, it's preferred, but when you're a person who doesn't fit into the status quo. So why knowledge management and racial equity? You're like, yeah, you know, I sort of get where you're coming from for knowledge management. I sort of get where you're coming from for racial equity, but what do they have to do with each other? Our old friend Peter Drucker, today knowledge has power. It controls access to opportunity and advancement. So if you don't have the knowledge that you need to do your job, you don't get advanced. And if you're not part of the little cliques in your organization, if you don't look or sound like other people in your organization, you don't have access to knowledge. So what can we do about that? We again see the top of the knowledge management stool, which it's not a great graphic, but I love it regardless. So it's all about building trust. Again, it's about building trust between your people, your process, and your technology. And for me, I came up with 3 basic bullets that sort of help us to find ways to build trust. Addressing power and privilege, accounting for trauma, and reimagining and building on what's already there. So if we take that first little part of the stool there, the people part, and we put these bullets to the people, addressing power and privilege, accounting for trauma, reimagining and building on what's already there. We'll start with addressing power and privilege. I was lucky enough to look at to stumble upon some research that Forward Through Ferguson had created about walking the equity path. And they had a great diagram which didn't go quite far enough for me. So that's why this is definitely based on Forward Through Ferguson, but with a little spin from Donita as well. What's happening these days, especially in the wake of some of the racial reckoning that is coming across as a result of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and hundreds before that, is that people are understanding how deeply embedded racism is, especially in the United States structures. And so many folks are now coming into consciousness of, wow, I knew it was there, but I didn't realize it was that bad. For many people, that coming into consciousness feels like a transformation. So they feel like they've already done the journey, right? If that's your board, if it's your senior leadership, if it's your trusted pals in your organization, having to address that power and saying, who gets to tell somebody, look, you're doing great, but you still have to go a little bit further. That's a hard discussion to have. So one of the ways in which I'll start the conversation is to throw up this continuum and then break it down into stakeholders. You can have it like your senior leadership, if you have a board, grantees, vendors, partner organizations, whatever that is, and make that little line with the shifter guy on all of those. And you can ask people to identify where they think they are on the continuum. And that will start all sorts of discussions, which is great and which is what we want, because if we don't talk to each other, if we don't start listening to each other, then we're lost. The next thing for people is accounting for trauma. I was told about the amygdala hijack by Alison France. She's over in Britain. I love the amygdala hijack with every fiber of my being because it explains so much. When the amygdala is the part of your brain that accounts for flight, fright, or freeze, the things that if you're like hit with some danger, like a saber-toothed tiger back in the day, you had these three options: fight, flee, or freeze. And so when we are hit with what we perceive as danger, those three responses come to the fore. And it depends on who you are and what situation you are as to what happens. When the amygdala is triggered like this, it will release cortisol and adrenaline into your system for 20 minutes at a time. And so for 18 to 20 minutes, you're incapable of rational thought. You're just like, how do I deal with the saber-toothed tiger? For Black and brown Americans, this happens to us on a daily, if not hourly basis. When another unarmed Black man is shot, it brings back all of the former trauma that we've experienced ourselves, plus the additional trauma of people being shot unarmed. Is that going to be me next? Will I be the next person that goes to jail for no reason? It all comes flooding back. So you've got your BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color, who are suffering from the amygdala hijack. But then you have people who are coming into this consciousness of how deeply embedded racism is. And for a lot of white Americans, there are feelings of guilt and shame that also trigger the amygdala. And so you've got white colleagues who are also being triggered by this, also not being able to function for 18 to 20 minutes. And then you've got people who think, none of this is real. I don't know why I have to go into racial equity training, because there is no racism in the United States. So I just want to do my job. So you've got those people who are triggered by this amygdala. You've got entire organizations who are now dealing with grief on a level that nobody's ever seen before. You've got people who are dealing with racial inequities, or if they don't think that their racial inequities exist. There are people out there who are freaking out, and organizations are not equipped to handle this, because this is not normal. This is not everyday business as usual. So when you think about how, if you're a leader in your organization, how you can account for the trauma of your staff being out of the physical building of your organization. I'm still working remotely. It holds its own trauma. For introvert preference people, it's great. I'm introvert preference. I love working from home. It's amazing. But for some of my extrovert pals, it is hard. It is hard to come to work and see people only through through rectangles. So think about how that is affecting us in COVID times, in this time of racial reckoning. Then the next thing is reimagining and building on what's already there. I'm assuming that since a lot of y'all are knowledge management folk, that you already know about organizational network analyses. But for those of you who don't, and these are just tools. Not everybody's going to use every tool, but I want to help people understand that there are different ways to look at things and look at how your organization is structured. So on the slide right now, you've got a hierarchy that we've all recognized. You know, we've got the senior people at the top and the more junior people at the bottom. If I were to look at this and say, I want to know about this organization. I want to know about how this runs. To whom would I go? I'd probably go to that senior vice president, because our brains are like, what is the word I'm looking for? I don't know. But we're made to think, oh, the person at the top knows the most. And so we would go to that person. There's something called the organizational network analysis that is, again, software-based. There are 3 to 5 questions that the organization comes up with itself. So your organization does it itself, which already has much more buy-in, right? So questions are like, if I need knowledge about how to do my job, to whom do I go? If I need IT knowledge, to whom do I go? If I need emotional support, to whom do I go? Those sorts of questions, right? You get all of those answers in a survey, and that gets plugged into some software, and it spits out something that looks like this. And this is Rob Cross. This is an actual organization. So they did this ONA, and they came out. A couple of things to note is that Mr. or Ms. Mitchell down here at the bottom, whom you'd never really think to ask, hey, what's your organization like? Where are the little knowledge gaps? Where are the knowledge, where does knowledge flow? Who holds on to knowledge? You'd probably not go to Mitchell. But if you look at it this way, you'll see that this person, Mr. or Ms. Mitchell, is in the center of a lot of stuff. Where it ties in with racial equity is that often the Mitchells of the organization are from marginalized communities. And if I ask you to think about who is that person or who are those people in your organization who just know stuff, you go to them as an unofficial source, like how do you turn on the copy machine? How do you, like, can I talk to so-and-so when the door is closed? There are people that you go to who have that knowledge. So the ONA, it's a hard sell sometimes, because the problem is that organizations already know this, but it's hard to see it writ large, because what happens if you go even deeper is then you can start to look at who is, because if you're sitting at the center of a lot of knowledge, great if you're somebody who makes sure that knowledge flows well. If you're a person who doesn't like to have knowledge flow well, if you want to hold it to yourself, then all of a sudden you are not the center of knowledge. You're still the center of knowledge, but knowledge isn't moving. So you start to identify why things can sometimes go pear-shaped, because it's not about process or technology. It's about the people who are using it, right? I think a lot of organizations shy away from addressing people problems, and so they throw technology and process at it, and say, okay, if we have the right form, then we can sidestep this issue of who's not getting along with whom and who's holding knowledge back from whom. So one of the great things about knowledge management is that there are actual tools that will show on a screen, on a piece of paper, on a computer, the things that need to be addressed in the organization. There are some other things that you can, I mean, again, these are just a few tools that I'm just highlighting here, but there are so many knowledge management tools that you can use to do similar things. Broadening networks, again, if you hear yourself or somebody in your organization saying, you know, we are looking for people with diverse backgrounds, but there's just nobody out there, you're not looking in the right place, because there are many studies that show that we are out there. We do have the education, we do have the knowledge to do so. There's, again, I think I mentioned the fact that we as a world are just so ready to let people walk out of our organizations with all of their knowledge. There are some amazing knowledge retention plans, processes that we can use in order to keep that knowledge internal. Engaging communities of practice. If you have a small organization and you're like, well, I just don't know a lot of people, there are communities of practice all over the country, all over the world that you can plug into. Encouraging inclusive decision making. This is a very big one, because power gives up power very grudgingly. But if you're like the person who makes all of the decisions for your team, maybe start thinking about who else can make those decisions and what support they would need in order to be able to make those decisions without being set up for failure. And then there's a website called racialequitytools.org, which I would highly recommend if you're thinking about if you're thinking about doing any of this. So that was the people part. And it's, the people part is the most important, which is why it took so long. Now we're going to go into process. So again, the same 3 bullet points: addressing power and privilege, accounting for trauma, reimagining on things. So addressing power and privilege. One of the simplest tools is looking at working styles. DISC assessment, Myers-Briggs, strengths finders, all of those things can help you understand how you identify as an organization. If you're only doing it in one team, that's great, but if you can do it for your entire organization, all of a sudden you have people who speak the same vocabulary and who can say, oh, I'm an introvert preference on a team of extroverts, or I'm an integrator on a team of dominance. There are different ways of handling all of that, all of those things within teams. Another thing is creating feedback channels that actually lead to action. There are many folks who say, hey, let's hear from the lower ranks, let's hear from different teams, and nothing ever happens. Start creating feedback channels. Have 360 reviews for your leadership so that they can hear how, because there are a lot of people who lead well but manage poorly. Find those people and then get them some support. It's not something to be ashamed of. If you've succeeded so well that you're now become a manager, but you don't know how to manage, that's just rude. Get some help for your folk. You hired them for a reason. And then get a marketplace of ideas going. There are people in your organization and you hired them for a reason. Just because they don't have a C in front of their name doesn't mean that they don't have ideas about how to make the organization better. Account for trauma. When you try and solve people problems with process, it's a disaster, and people feel that and they carry that around with them. When you say to somebody, oh, I trust you, you can do this, but you don't give them the tools or the people or the funding to get something done, and then they fail, misguided empowerment is another one. We talked about decentralizing decision making, and Overcomplication of simple tasks. Ooh, that one kills me, because we will do so many things to make stuff complicated for no reason. And then reimagine and build on what's already there. Look at your systems. Look at to see whether they have inherent bias or redundancy. Like, don't make people fill something out twice just because that's the way everything's always been done. A friend of mine wrote an article about an HR. It was an artificial intelligence thing that would look through resumes and stuff. And it put people who posted about Black Lives Matter in the same bucket as white supremacists and threw them both out. So you have to be really careful, because yes, technology is supposed to be agnostic, but the people programming technology are not agnostic. So look for those biases, look for those redundancies, save your employees some hassle. Knowledge capture processes, after action reviews, kickoff and closeout meetings, cross-sector meet and greets, hugely helpful. And then again, use the people in your organization. They're smart. They know what's there. Going on to technology. This is technology. Who decides what technology to implement, right? Do you go to your frontline staff and say, hey, we're thinking of getting an entirely new database. What do you think? No, you just make the decision and then have them have to figure it out. Does everyone have access to the same platforms? This became a huge thing when we all started working from home, because some people didn't have broadband. And so if you feel like somebody is snubbing you because they don't have their video camera on, you're making assumptions when that person is actually just trying to save bandwidth. Is your training curriculum designed for different thinkers? I'm a visual learner, and if I get a lot of stuff thrown at me on slides or things, I can't process that. I have to take it back and read it and go, oh, that's what that was, and come back. But for people who are auditory learners, or for people who can make decisions in the moment, it's all things to consider as you're looking at how you build equity into your organization. And again, do your systems exacerbate bias? This is another thing that it was taught to me by KMI, and I will forever be grateful to KMI for the Gartner hype cycle. For technology, Gartner is a software organization, and they literally try and measure the hype of a software thing when it's released. But I have discovered that it applies to every aspect of my life. So for a technology trigger, you're getting a new database. Everybody's like, yes, finally, our organization's going to be great. And because you've set that expectation, the minute some human gets involved and causes it to shut down or it doesn't work, into the trough of disillusionment. That traumatizes people, because you've had these high hopes for like this wonderful thing, and now it's horrible. Now, why did we do this? This is ridiculous. It's blah blah blah. Eventually you're like, well, it's better than what we had, and I guess I can kind of work with it. And then you get onto the plateau of productivity, which is, hey, I can work with this. The plateau of productivity is never high as the peak of inflated expectations. And knowing that, you can mitigate those things, right? If you are planning a new software launch, if you're planning a restructure of your organization, if new people are coming into your organization, understand that they're heading into a hype cycle. I'll put it this way for you, like if you in your personal life, if you meet somebody and you're like, oh my God, he's dreamy, he's so wonderful, we're gonna have a beautiful life together. Woo-hoo. And then you go out and then he eats with his mouth open, and you're like, oh no, trough of disillusionment. No. Eventually you get onto the slope of enlightenment, and you're like, well, he eats with his mouth open, but that can change, and he's really nice to his mom, so well, what are you going to do? And then you get onto the plateau of productivity. You know what? I can build something with this person. When you find yourself going into that hype cycle, stop and just go, oh, right. Heading into the hype cycle, let me manage my expectations. This CRM is not going to solve all of our problems. This restructure of our organization is not going to go seamlessly, and that's okay. Account for the trauma that you're going to cause. And lastly, reimagine and build what's already there. Disaggregation of data is hugely important. Our employee opinion survey comes out every year, but we don't look at senior staff versus program staff versus junior staff. I hate the word junior or the term junior staff, but for the moment, that's what I'm going to use. We don't look at it. And so it's a rule by the masses rather than identifying places where there might be inequities that have hidden behind things that are not disaggregated. Using technology to find your subject matter experts, places of looking at what documents get used the most in your organization. Technology is a beautiful thing when it's used correctly. And then this deck was created before COVID, but virtual meetings are going to stay here. So how do we leverage them? How do we make them not, oh God, another hour staring at a rectangle? How do we create new ways for people to think about it? So that is the end of the fire hose of information. I will ask, there's some questions like what resonates most with you? And I think we won't have time for breakout rooms, but we'll come back together as a group and talk through some of this. Where are you most uncomfortable and why? And what can deepen this framework? So I thank you for listening to me for 46 minutes. Like I said, it's a slide heavy thing, but I want to give you as many tools so that ideas can spark in your own mind, and so that you can go out thinking about all of this stuff. So thank you so much for being here, and I'm going to stop sharing so I can get everybody up onto the screen. And if you're not having bandwidth issues, I would love it if people could turn on their cameras. I know that I am tired of the sound of my own voice. So I would love to hear from folks, what resonated with you? What are some ideas that you might take back into your organization, etc. And I can't see everybody, so let's just see who's brave enough to break the silence.
Hey, Donita, real quick, we also have a few questions in the chat box. If you can check that too after this little session. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right. Who's going to start? All right, y'all asked for it. I'll just continue with my voice. Monica wrote, when you talk about diversity and inclusion, do you also include people of different generation, different age, different retirees, because many times there is age discrimination? Absolutely. If you look at what the youth of America did in this last few months, you would be really remiss in not getting youth into your organizations. Also, people who are about to retire or have been in whatever sector you're in for 10, 20, 15, they hold so much knowledge. Do not discount people simply based on age, because you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. All right. Oh, hello, Kenya. I'm looking at the chat, if anybody. Mercy wrote, this is insightful. For Kenya, I'm replacing race with tribe. It is the most divisive tool in workplaces and opportunities. Replace vocabulary with language. Leadership is still shy from addressing it. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I come from a very particular lens, but with just a very little tweaking, as you've already done, Mercy, like you can use these tools in whatever situation you're coming from. So thank you. What do you think about having a new pillar called content that is separate from processes and technology? So for example, technology would be tools and strategies. That's from Monica again. I like to keep things simple. So content for me is housed in all of those things, in technology, in the process, in the people, primarily in people. But here's the thing. You can take parts of this framework and do whatever you want with it. This is not something that's set in stone. This came out of my brain. So what I would love is to see, like, a year from now, somebody coming back with a Gartner hype cycle in their presentation talking about, you know, I bought a purse that I thought was going to change my life and it didn't, and I'm okay with that. And I brought that over into my organization and how to use change management. Yeah. Anybody else?
Donita, my name's Jenny. I'm calling from the UK. I'm head of knowledge management at a law firm. It's more of a comment than question, I suppose, but I think maybe in certainly English law firms, often we have a problem getting people into organisations that are diverse. So, you know, all the great things that you've talked about on the in your presentation so far in terms of what you can do when they're there. We've got an issue trying to get more diverse people actually into the organisation. You can start to do some of the great things. I was also going to suggest another area of the sort of diversity and inclusion menu that we are focused on at our firm, and you know, a lot of organisations, is the mental health side. So good KM makes you happy, just in terms of reducing stress and anxiety at work, if you can find things more easily, if you can structure data that is unstructured, if you can give people the tools to find networks or connect with knowledge, then I think that's good for people's mental. That was all I was going to say. Thank you for the talk.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that mental health is going to be even a bigger thing than we have currently because of COVID, because of racial inequities, because of the refugee crisis. There are going to be we're going to have to deal with a lot of stuff in our organizations. Also, differently abled people. We did a session, and one of our participants was blind, and so thinking about how to get information to this person in a way that was respectful and also ensured that the person was a part of the conversation without any sort of thought through it. And that was just really, it was an amazing experience. So if you're thinking about people with physical disabilities or learning disabilities or any sort of differently abled people, as well as race and all of the other things that I mentioned earlier.
Sorry, I'm Aaron Smith. I'm in the DC area.
Hey, Aaron.
Hi. This is a really interesting topic. Me being a person of color, I have my own personal experiences, both good and bad. But in the workplace, I never really thought of it the way you kind of delivered it, that information. I've studied emotional intelligence and the Art of Human Nature is a book by Robert Greene. And it speaks directly toward, the recognition of, oneself and other people and their emotions and what they may think and feel and so forth, character types and all of that. And with the true value of knowledge, how that can be, overlooked in the workplace because of our inability sometimes to look at other people as our equals. And I don't see discrimination as a racial issue. It can be a part of that, but like everyone else stated, age, disability, and so forth, those things can keep us from actually seeing someone else's knowledge as being valuable. And I think that's an important thing to focus on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Aaron.
Can I add something?
Of course.
My name is Job from Kenya, and yes, thank you so much for the presentation. I have never linked knowledge management with racial issues, but this is the first time that I'm seeing the link. Though, just something I wanted to ask is, how to connect, you know, the human knowledge, which you know, in the societal changes, communal living, and all these aspects that, you know, build up human resilience in interaction and all that. I mean, since time memorial, there's been a way that every race is profiled in a certain way, even without you knowing that you're actually being profiled, depending on which area of the world you go to and all that. But sometimes I think there's very little studies that have been done in connecting, you know, the human knowledge, intelligence, you know, emotional intelligence and relationships and all that, and how this really affects their perceptions towards each other. I mean, just looking at these two broad areas of capitalist, socialist, and all that, it's something that can really take ages before we understand the connection. But very little studies actually have been done in connecting, you know, ratio or issues around equality and the human knowledge of survival, how we live, resilience, and all these aspects. So I think that is something that, you know, can really bring up the issue better, other than the streets where we are carrying placards and saying this is what is happening. Though it's a strategy on itself. But, you know, how can we, you know, bring this, you know, the table and show, you know, all involving social scientists, just to make sure that they really understand and what will be some of the, you know, solutions that can be put in place in order to you know, to leverage on the knowledge that we have and how people used to survive, and what can, you know, different communities can adapt, and how we can move forward, just leveraging on the knowledge of survival and all that.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. But it's great. There are some studies. Of course, they fly out of my mind at the moment. But again, the Google is a fantastic tool. And if anybody doubts the power of youth, think about how your mood changed when you heard that baby in that moment, right? You immediately got taken out of thinking about these very things and thought about this child. I mean, something as simple as that is. That's human, right? So when you are, so for example, when you're doing a Zoom meeting, people are coming in from other Zoom meetings, they're tired. I usually like to have music playing when I start one of these sessions, or baby animals. If you've got a picture of a beautiful scene or baby animals, it actually tricks your brain into going, oh, hey, this is something new. So it's about, like, but then people in the corporate world or in the business world or in the philanthropy world are like, why is this woman playing music? Why am I looking at baby animals? It's because we're doing this to help your brain deal with this very wacky situation of seeing everybody through a rectangle. Mercy, don't think I don't see that baby. Love those babies. Before we go, I've two things to say. There was a woman from Pakistan who came and joined the protests when in Ferguson with Michael Brown, and somebody asked her why she was marching, and she said, "I know this is not necessarily my fight, but I know that if you win this fight, mine will be that much further along." So regardless of where you are starting this moment, if it's fighting for people with different abilities, fighting for people who are young, who are older, who are Black, who are white, who have a different sexual orientation, we can join together. We have places that we can meet up so that we can move everything forward for each other. If the lowest among us succeeds, we all succeed. I forgot the other point, which is great because it's 10:59, and I'd like to say thank you to all of you for being here, for sticking through this. I hope you have some questions for yourself, questions for your organization, and remember how we started, which is thinking about the things that brought us joy. Go into this world and do this work with joy. Find places that you can you can lead with it, so that when the not so joyful moments come along, you have a little bit of reserve. I'd like to thank Eric and Brandon again for opening this platform. Thank you all so much for being here, and reach out, let me know, let Eric know if you have more questions and concerns. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks again, Donita. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.